Tinto's really pleased to have donated $355,000 to 14 organizations across Canada who provide shelter and counseling.
Tonight, a multinational corporation donates to women's shelters.
The parallel that I see was a Robin Williams, somebody who was just so full of joy, it seemed like, but on the inside, his life was so terrible from his perspective that he took his own life.
Plus, a community in crisis. A First Nation in the Yukon calls for a state of emergency, but there are fears no one in power is listening. And a judge in Alberta finds an Edmonton police constable in the assault of an Indigenous man. Good evening and welcome to APTN National News. I'm Daryl Stranger. Today is the National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women. The day commemorates the killing of 14 women at École Polytechnique in 1989. The Ontario Native Women's Association marked the day by raising a Wrapped in Courage flag. Wrapped in Courage is a campaign to end gender-based violence. Cora McGuire-Siret is with ONWA. She says Indigenous women know what they need.
Over the decades, we've published numerous other reports along with recommendations that are formed on the basis of what Indigenous women want to see, because they're the experts, not us, they are. So we need to really look at, as a community, how to include their recommendations and their voices, because they're the experts on solutions that they need. And, this is also looking at the same in the development of the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls National Action Plan. And the key recommendations that are missing in there, because there's a lack of data. The stories and the violence that Indigenous women face is still largely unknown, because data tells one part of the story. It tells the truth of what's happening on the ground. And, the data tells what policies and systemic changes we need to have. Without this data, we can't really move forward on key recommendations, because the data and violence does not know jurisdiction or boundaries.
And another campaign, 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence, continues until December the 10th. Mining giant Rio Tinto is taking part by donating to 14 organizations across Canada. The Cassant Society in BC will be getting part of that money, and they shared with APTN's Lee Wilson what they plan to do with the funding.
16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence is an international campaign about raising awareness and creating changes. This year is its 30th anniversary. One of the world's largest mining companies is raising awareness by giving $355,000 to organizations here in Canada.
Tinto's really pleased to have donated $355,000 to 14 organizations across Canada who provide shelter and counseling and other services for families.
They are also raising awareness with employees and connecting with local organizations. Each year, the Rio Tinto Canada Fund donates money to the communities they operate in. The Cassant Society is one of those organizations that will receive a $25,000 donation. They are a nonprofit that has operated in the Terrace area for over 40 years. They offer counseling, housing services, and offer multiple food security programs. Executive Director Amanda Owens says the pandemic created challenges for people to get supports.
When you're told to, stay home and stay isolated as much as you can because we're in the middle of a pandemic, it's hard to reach out and actually get supports and services when you're experiencing unhealthy relationships or any kind of violence.
Cassant Society has qualified counselors with no cost to the people who need those services. Lisa Smith is the Director of Counseling. She says they receive funding from multiple sources, but that is focused on women. This funding will focus on offering counseling for men who are experiencing or perpetrating violence.
When women are getting supports, but then they're going back to a potentially violent or fatal relationship where the man hasn't necessarily made any change to his cycle of violence. So we'd like to support men as well.
Cassant Society supports about 300 people a month through their programs. They see counseling and supports as part of a long-term healing process.
I think women, children, and the men too that we do serve do experience that feeling of, okay, somebody gets me now. But the services, they can take some time sometimes, right? Like we're consistently here for folks, but trauma counseling can take years.
The 16-day campaign wraps up this Friday. Lee Wilson, APTN National News, Terrace.
A rural community in the Yukon is struggling with an addictions and mental health crisis. Now, residents of Mayo are calling on the territorial government to declare a state of emergency so it can receive the supports it needs. Here's Sarah Connors with that story.
These photos show the happy memories Don Hutton has of his son, Frank. A Nacho-Nayakdun First Nation citizen from Mayo, Yukon, Frank died by suicide on September 1st.
The parallel that I see was a Robin Williams, somebody who was just so full of joy, it seemed like, but on the inside, his life was so terrible from his perspective that he took his own life.
Frank struggled with substance use and suffered from depression, and he wasn't alone. It's a reality affecting many in the small village of around 450 people.
We've lost so many young people. There's not a family in this community that hasn't been impacted by this, and it's such a small, tight-knit community to start with.
Mayo is also home to the Nacho-Nayakdun First Nation. This year alone, the community lost 5 people to either suicide, addiction, or murder. 4 of those people were Indigenous. And the crisis isn't just in Mayo. Last week, Yukon's coroner service announced the territory is leading Canada in overdose deaths per population. Since 2016, 54 people died in Yukon from the illicit use of opioids. Hutton says what's currently being offered by Yukon's Liberal government isn't working, and he's not keeping quiet about it.
Our territorial government has taken no action. This inaction has cost the health and lives of many people in my communities.
A former Liberal MLA from Mayo Tachin, Hutton crossed the floor to sit as an independent earlier this year over what he says was the Liberals' inaction on alcohol abuse and addictions in Yukon's rural communities.
I've listened for 5 years to words. It's time for action. I want to see some help for this community.
The whole community is affected. The whole community.
It's an issue Nacho-Nayakdun citizen Karen Niklu knows well. She's a recovering drug user who's gone door to door offering support to people who use drugs. Niklu says the community is suffering from many issues like the effects of colonization and intergenerational trauma, and drugs and alcohol are an escape from reality.
Generally speaking, on any given day, you've got about between 50 and 100 active users in Mayo. But the government does have to do something. There's just, no supports in the community.
The community only has one counsellor. While other supports are available, they're not permanently fixed in Mayo. For instance, the nearest mental health and addictions hub is a 3 hours drive away in Dawson City.
Does the minister understand the urgency of the situation in Mayo and what is being done to support this community right now?
Last month, NDP leader Kate White tabled a petition signed by residents of Mayo in the Yukon legislature. It's calling on the Yukon government to declare a state of emergency in the community. White says calling a state of emergency could provide Mayo with the supports it needs, whatever that may look like.
We can't wait. And so if declaring an emergency gives us access to those supports, then I think we should. Absolutely.
Hutton is hoping that could include putting more mental health professionals in Yukon's rural communities.
We need to put pressure on our governments to get more mental health professionals out there so that the people that need the help can get it when they need it.
For Niklu, she'd like to see support workers going door to door like she did.
The government, the Yukon needs to do. They need to start supporting people more like me, and we get 5 of us in there, and go door to door, build a rapport with the clients, right?
Natchez First Nations chief did not respond to our request for comment, and Health Minister Tracy Ann McPhee could not meet our interview deadline. Despite the plea to do so, Yukon government has still not declared a state of emergency.
And we need to jump on this, right?
But Nick Liu says if something isn't done, and soon, it will only lead to more deaths.
It's not going to stop until we start getting some action, from the government. They campaigned, they made promises, so let's step up and do it.
Meanwhile, Hutton says he's speaking out about his son and hopes it will break the stigma surrounding addictions and mental health.
We need to teach our young men, if you're hurting, reach out.
Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Mayo and Whitehorse.
An Edmonton police officer convicted of assaulting an Indigenous man during an arrest in 2019 has been fined $2,600 for his crime. We have a video of the incident, and some of you may find the images disturbing. Constable Michael Partington was convicted of assault after this shocking video was posted online in 2019. He is currently awaiting an internal review of his conduct and remains suspended without pay. And last week, an Alberta court judge levied a $2,600 fine for what he called an unnecessary and gratuitous assault. The other officer in the video arrested Elliot McLeod for riding a bike without a bell. McLeod didn't sustain lasting physical injuries from the assault, despite being punched multiple times and kneed by Partington. Edmonton media report he is suing the Edmonton Police Service for $250,000. And a Winnipeg nonprofit organization that provides housing, employment, and volunteer opportunities to Winnipeg's homeless may lose its building after funding was cut. Scope Inc. says the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation denied their rapid housing application, and that means the loss of more than 100 full-time, part-time, and casual staff. Right now, they house 46 people. Angela McCoggan is the executive director.
So we are very capable of keeping this building, but we need the down payment for it because we don't have that. We have been busy during COVID-19, feeding, housing, doing laundry for some of the most marginalized people of society, those living with mental health issues, and those experiencing homelessness.
All right, we need to take a short break, but still to come, there's a newly elected regional AFN chief for New Brunswick. We'll tell you who next. Welcome back. There's a newly elected regional AFN chief for New Brunswick, and one of the first things she did was criticizing that province's premier. Injo Moore reports.
He's a ding-dong, if that's the better word. He just does not know what he's doing. He's actually making it worse for the people of the province, but yet he's doing that.
That's Regional Chief Joanna Bernard. She's talking about New Brunswick Premier Blaine Higgs, after Higgs told reporters last week a title claim by the Lowistikwe Chiefs will risk homeowners' property. Bernard hopes it will help the Mi'kmaq nations in New Brunswick who are researching their title claim area.
What sets precedents for Wolastoqey claim will also fall over onto the Mi'kmaq eventually. So I think it's, whether they're doing it together or not, it's for the benefit of the whole here in the province.
Bernard won 80% of the vote and succeeds Roger Augustine, who was regional chief since 2008. She will consult with her chiefs to take issues to Ottawa.
Well, there are some priorities that I believe that we should be focusing on, and this is only my opinion, of course. I will wait for my chiefs. But fisheries, truth and reconciliation, land claims are very severe issues that we really need to focus on to move forward.
Bernard was chief of her community for 10 years. She was arrested in 2008 for fishing without a license. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Djibouti, also known as Halifax.
Over 30 people were arrested by RCMP in the Wet'suwet'en land conflict last month. 2 of those people were journalists. We are joined by award-winning photojournalist Amber Bracken, who for multiple years witnessed events unfold from inside the Wet'suwet'en camps. Amber, thanks so much for joining us here today. Can you share when you first started reporting from inside the Wet'suwet'en camps and what you've witnessed over the years as a BC Supreme Court injunction has been enforced?
Yeah, of course. I started reporting from Wet'suwet'en territory in 2018. That was right around the time Coastal GasLink was applying for an injunction to remove occupiers from the territory that were opposing the pipeline construction. Of course, it's all seated in a much bigger issue of land rights and Aboriginal rights and title, which is very interesting and very relevant to the larger conversation of reconciliation in Canada. So started following it for that reason, and then of course just a few months later was the first enforcement. I've watched over the last 3 years several rounds of this militarized enforcement of this injunction, where you have militarized police forces coming in, using helicopters, police dogs, all kinds of different weapons, including sniper rifles, removing land defenders from the territory.
Now, Amber, on November the 19th, you and filmmaker Michael Toledano were arrested by RCMP. Can you share what happened and how long you were held?
Sure. So Hereditary Chief Slato, Molly Wickham, of the Gidimdim clan, she was inside of a tiny house adjacent to the right-of-way with a small group of supporters. They had locked themselves inside, anticipating the arrival of police. When police arrived, they were told they needed a warrant. They said they'd go get one. Instead, they came back and said that they were going to open the tiny house under the auspices of the injunction. So they took an axe to the door, and as soon as there was a big enough hole inside, they started pointing weapons at the people inside. And then there was a chainsaw. Like I've honestly kept comparing it to Jack Nicholson in The Shining. The way they came through that door was really intense. And then they arrested everybody inside. Now, Michael Toledano and myself both identified ourselves immediately as journalists, as working media. Our desks and producers and the CAJ had also notified them that we would be in the territory. I had, actually we both had press credentials on the outside of our person, as well as I had like an assignment letter in my pocket. I mean, none of it mattered. They knew exactly who I was, and they arrested us anyways. And then being that it was a civil charge, they took us in on Friday, and we weren't able to see a judge until Monday, which meant 3 nights and 4 days in cells.
No, Amber.
And also not being able to do the work as the story continued over the weekend.
Right, and affidavits released in court last month also pointed to both of you being tracked by the RCMP. When did you learn that was taking place?
I didn't find out that was happening for myself until that reporting came out after I'd been arrested and charged. Michael Toledano, I know, has filed an FOI request on himself in the past and has, hundreds of pages of documents of them tracking his activities on the territory. And obviously it's incredibly problematic and disconcerting when police are tracking the activities of journalists using non-criminal data. So there's files on me at all is very unsettling.
And finally, Amber, how has your experience created concerns of freedom of the press here in Canada?
Absolutely. And I don't think it's just my experience. I think there's a track record in Canada of suppressing media specifically related to Indigenous resistance to, anything. And whenever an Indigenous community is not in agreement with either industry or government and has taken to the streets to protest or to occupy, we've seen several rounds of repression of media coverage of those things. I think it's an inconvenient image. I don't think that they particularly like to be photographed as they're pointing guns at Indigenous people while we talk about reconciliation quite broadly. And ever since OCA, we have seen the criminalization and the attempt to discredit journalists that report closely on the activities of resistors. So the people who were inside the razor wire at OCA were criminalized, were discredited, and were eventually taken to court. We've also seen it at Muskrat Falls Dam, where Justin was eventually vindicated for his role covering the protesters there. We've seen it at Landback Lane, where Carl Dockstetter was also criminalized for reporting from that activity, not to mention Fairy Creek and several rounds of restrictions, detainments, and just general suppression of media access to the Wet'suwet'en story over the last 3 years. So this is very concerning. It's of national importance, and it is absolutely shown to be in a pattern, specific to the coverage of this kind of an issue.
Right. Well, Amber, I want to thank you for taking a few minutes out of your day to speak with us about this.
Thanks for your time.
All right, we need to take one final break, but still ahead, today's photo of the day is sure to put you in the Christmas spirit. Welcome back. It's time now for our photo of the day. For 23 years in Kinnesota, Manitoba, our viewers Eric and Lauren Ducharme have set up this Christmas greeting that can be seen from the highway by all who drive by. Merry Christmas to you, and thanks for sharing with us. You can submit your photos to share@aptn.ca for the chance to be featured as our next photo of the day. And now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting over in the east, -3 in Charlottetown and +4 in Fredericton. -2 in snow in Nain and -19 in La Grande River. -5 in a mix of sun and cloud in Quebec City and -17 in Rouyn-Noranda. -12 in a mix of sun and cloud in North Bay and 0 in snow in Sault Ste. Marie. -23 in Big Trout Lake and -18 in Timmins. -26 in a mix of sun and cloud in Churchill and sunshine and -26 in Thompson. -18 in Barons River and -18 in Princess Harbour. -17 in North Battleford and -15 in Saskatoon. -27 and a mix of sun and cloud in Stony Rapids and -19 in Buffalo Narrows. Over in the west, -17 in Fort Chipewyan and -12 in snow in Peace River. -10 in Red Deer and -1 in Calgary. +6 in Vancouver and snow and -4 in Cornell. Snow and -11 in Dease Lake and -5 in snow in Smithers. Snowing and -15 in Old Crow and -21 in Mayo. -22 in a mix of sun and cloud in Norman Wells and -17 in snow in Yellowknife. -7 in Inuvik and -5 in Fort McPherson. Sunshine and -26 in Cambridge Bay and -27 in sun in Chesterfield. Snow and -22 in Resolute and -10 in Iqaluit. It's been 2 years since the last Grey Cup, and this year's showdown will look very familiar.
Grey Cup 108. Winnipeg's mission, get back.
The Winnipeg Blue Bombers beat the Saskatchewan Roughriders 21-17 to advance to next Sunday's Grey Cup. The defending champs will face the Hamilton Tiger Cats, who upset the Toronto Argonauts 27-19 in the Eastern Final. The Tiger Cats haven't won the Grey Cup since 1999, but will have home field advantage for Sunday's final. That's going to do it for this Monday edition of APTN National News. For news anytime, check out our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Daryl Stranger. Thanks for joining us, and have a great night.